Welcome to Sunspots, where we explore the many ways that the Holy Spirit is working in the people, places, ministries, and missions on the surface of the sun. That is, the Synod of the Sun. I'm Valerie Young, your Synod leader. My prayer is that you find inspiration, community, and connection in the sun. A little while back, I had the pleasure of Zooming with the Reverend Lynn Hargrove. Lynn is the General Presbyter and Stated Clerk for Administrative Process for the Presbytery of New Covenant. Lynn has a rich history with and respect for the people of Southeast Texas, and it shows. Being on the Gulf of Mexico means that there are natural disasters aplenty. We talk about some of that, as well as expectations of pastors, that hot topic of divestment, and the best things coming out of New Covenant right now. Hope you'll listen in. So, how you doing?
I'm good.
Reverend Lynn Hargrove from New Covenant Presbytery. Yay.
Yes, indeed. That's where I am. So New Covenant covers 35 counties across Southeast Texas. The biggest part of where we are, obviously, would be Houston, which is the fourth largest city in the country, and has a fair number of Presbyterian churches, but we cover all the way down to Galveston and Bay City, up north to Nacogdoches, and out northwest to Brenham, Bryan, College Station, places like that, and all the way to the Louisiana border. So we may actually be the smallest geographically in the state of Texas, since we only have 5 presbyteries in the state of Texas, but
Right.
It feels like we have a lot of territory. Not quite like Mission Presbytery.
Right. But you have a lot more population. A lot more
Right.
people in the
metro
population.
Yeah. Although we have, rural churches as well. So they're not all in the big city.
Right. But in terms of, it's not just about PCUSA members. It's not just about church members. It's about the size of the communities that you serve. Right.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, the needs in Houston are vast, and depending on what's going on with Mother Nature and things like that, the needs can increase.
Right. I was going to ask you about that. So you do sit between Mission Presbytery, which is the very south tip of Texas, and South Louisiana, like you talked about, both of which have been known, and frankly, so is New Covenant, known for your disaster-prone areas. So
indeed. And we can have all kinds of different disasters. I'm trying not to speak the H word, which was those swirly things out in the Gulf, because I don't want to bring one on. And the weather patterns have been weird. With the dust that was blowing from the Sahara across the ocean, it's kept some of that activity down in the Atlantic. And so that's helpful, and we just kind of wait and see what happens. Thankfully for us, but not for our friends in South Louisiana, the 2 that went in there last year just got the very edge of our presbytery, but it wasn't as devastating, say, as Harvey had been when we got 51 inches of rain over 3 or 4 days, and flooded a whole lot of the Houston area.
Right. Well, yeah. And right. So tell us your story, Lynn. Tell us your story in a nutshell. Where do you come from? Before you came
or a thumbnail or whatever. Yeah, my dad, I grew up an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. He was an officer, and we moved every year. And so I don't really feel that I have a lot of deep roots with anybody. My deep roots are within my nuclear family. And so it's my parents and my 2 sisters and me. And we moved pretty much every year until I was in high school. When I was in high school, I started attending an Episcopal church, because that's where the active youth group was. And we'd have dances on Friday night in the basement with bands and all that kind of thing. And it was the cool place to hang out. And so there were kids from 2 different high schools there. And that was really where I found my roots. And it was while I was sitting outside that school one day, as I was learning to drive, I heard a voice saying, well, you could be a minister. And I thought, what? I didn't see any women ministers in the Episcopal church. I hadn't really seen any at all. And so I kind of ran away from that for a long time, and finally went to seminary after 2 children, and years of marriage, and was ordained almost 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered about that. Is that what call sounded like to you? Was like a literal, you could be a minister? I've just always wondered what that's like for, I'm sure it's different for, every person that hears that call. But as one
Yeah,
who's really heard it, is that,
yeah, I think it probably is. And I actually didn't remember that story until after I started doing seminary classes again. So Austin Seminary had an extension program here in Houston. So I could do half my degree here by taking 2 classes on a Thursday night. And so that took 3.5 years. And then they wanted us to start commuting back and forth to Austin. So that took another 2 years. So it took me 5.5 years to get through seminary, which was fine because it was nice to be able to be here at home. Especially when my kids, my son in particular was little. I started commuting when he was in 1st grade, and I studied, but I have this habit of dropping in and dropping out in weird times. And so I've done 3.5 years here in Houston. So when I started at Austin, it was in January. And when I finished classes 2 years later, it was in November. And so I didn't really necessarily, I felt like I was a double commuter because I'd not only commuted from Houston to Austin, but my parents lived in Austin, so I didn't live on campus. And they provided room and board. So I managed to get through seminary in a fairly inexpensive manner because my church was paying tuition and books. And so my parents were providing room and board. So my big cost was gas to go back and forth. And that
right. But what you lost in that process, I'm guessing, what you may have missed in that process was developing a certain community that I understand tends to develop when you're attending seminary in person, rooming and everything on campus.
I probably did. And it was funny because there was an alumni newsletter that they started at some point, maybe about, I don't know, 10 years ago, a little bit more longer than that, I don't know. And I was the first alumni featured. And I imagine that there were people that said, who the hell is she? She wasn't in my class because I came in January and left in November 2 years later. But I still graduated in May with my class. And I was late to the class picture, so I'm not even in that. But I had led worship in Houston and had to get from Houston to Austin for graduation. So I didn't know they were doing the class picture. So I got there in time for graduation, but I missed the picture. So I imagine they'd still say, who the hell is she? And that's okay.
So what was your first call?
My first call, let's see, what was my first call? I was working as a hospital chaplain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did 2 years of CPE at St. Luke's Hospital in Houston. And that was kind of funny because I'd left classes in November on a Thursday, had my first interview on Friday, my second interview on Monday, and started work on Wednesday the next week. So I was employed within a week of my finishing classes. And it was, again, December. So I dropped in after the program had already started. And I had done a unit at CPE in Austin at Austin State Hospital. And that was sort of a hybrid of being a resident and being an intern. So I kind of crossed over both of those programs, and then did a residency at St. Luke's, which also covered Texas Children's Hospital. But they had already started and formed their group, and somebody dropped out, so they let me come in December. And so I did the other my 3 units, and then I stuck around for a second year. So I have 8 units at CPE. And then they offered us a coworker and I to stick around for a 3rd year as chaplain fellows. And so did almost 3 years at St. Luke's Hospital in Texas Children.
Wow. And then what?
Then I stayed home for a while with my son, who at that point, let's see, he was late elementary going in the middle school. So I would work at various positions as I was able to around Houston, but some of that was just staying home and being the stay-at-home mom and taking care of my kids. My daughter had started high school when I went to Austin commuting, and Sam my son had started first grade. So when I finished, so at third grade I guess he was going into middle school when I left St. Louis. And that there's a lot more driving to that and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because they don't drive yet. And by that point, our daughter was getting ready to go to college. So my son needed some care.
Well, yeah. And middle school is just like that.
Exactly. Kind of brutal. And he was playing baseball and I was kind of the baseball mom and all of that, doing the communication with the other moms so we could get our kids to the games and all that kind of stuff. And just doing that sort of thing. And then I worked at a couple of different churches doing a couple of different things, director of family ministries at St. John's. I was a 3-month wonder at Memorial Drive in their pastoral care because they had lost an interim and they knew they had somebody coming in 3 months. And then they let me volunteer for another 5 months. So I was there pretty much the whole school year. I was pastor of St. Giles Presbyterian Church, which dissolved while I was there, but it was not due to me.
No, as I understand it, you went in there knowing. I mean, that was, is that not right? Knowing
basically, yeah. They called me as an interim, and it was pretty clear they weren't ever going to be able to call another installed pastor unless they did a lot of changing. And churches don't necessarily want to change. So we did what we could, and I was there for 4 years. And by the time I was part-time there as pastor, and at that point I had also started at the Presbytery as the part-time stated clerk, and stated clerk was taking over my life. And so I could have stayed with St. Giles for another year and, kind of continued to limp along, or we made a plan and actually gave that building to a new worshiping community. And so they took the building and about 30 church members, and they're still in business. It's still a Presbyterian church. It's just not St. Giles anymore. But it was a faithful decision that they made, and I was happy to be able to help them to do that and to continue doing the ministry.
Yeah, that's hard and really awesome. I just finished recording a podcast with Carol Waters, and we talked a lot about what ministry looks like in the midst of a pandemic and how things are not, I mean, obviously St. Giles, that was way before the pandemic, but how we see that church is not going back to what it used to be. It will never be the same. And all of the infinite possibilities that are out there for the church to be the church in the community in a different way.
Well, exactly. And so one of the things that I did with the session when I was at St. Giles was I sent people out to ask 5 questions. And there was 2 by 2. Nobody had to go alone, 2 by 2. And it's talk to 3 people that you encounter and ask these questions. What are the biggest issues in this neighborhood? What can the church, or how can the church respond? Name some churches in the area. When I say the name St. Giles, does it mean anything, or what does it mean to you? And how can I pray for you? Those were the 5 questions. And it was intriguing that the people that they encountered, maybe sitting at Starbucks because they didn't want to go walk in the neighborhood, or maybe at the Mexican restaurant that 5 or 6 couples went to every Sunday after church, but the restaurant didn't know they were all from the same church because they wouldn't sit together or say anything about being from the church. So the people in the neighborhood that knew who St. Giles, the church was, were the people that got fed there through the food pantry that basically had no homes. And so that was who knew St. Giles, not the Starbucks crowd, and not the, and so it was fascinating for the session to realize that. And we drove around the neighborhoods and to see what was out there, and realized we had a lot of auto repair places and stuff like that. So it was the neighborhood in transition. And actually the pastor right before me, they thought they wanted to do Hispanic ministry. And so they called a woman who's actually from Brazil. Well, guess what language they speak in Brazil? not Spanish. Yeah. And so they called her, and she actually didn't like going to the church because she called it the ghetto.
Oh,
Yeah. And so that became interesting. She was there, I don't know, 3 years. And so the church had kind of fallen apart through her leadership. And when I was invited in as the interim, I realized pretty quickly things needed to change. I think they were down to, I don't know, 50 people on the roster, but not that many. So we set some benchmarks. If membership fell below this number, if worship attendance fell below this number, if we couldn't pay our bills, it was time to close. And we had gotten there, not through any fault of what we were doing. I mean, one of the things that I was really proud of that we did when we were there was we had a February where it got down to 20 degrees. And we don't get to 20 degrees very often in Houston, Texas. And because we had these relationships with these folks that didn't really have housing, we went and rounded them all. First, I asked the session. I said, "Are you willing to open the church doors to let these people sleep at the church?" And if any session member said no, we wouldn't do it. And every session member said yes. That's what we needed to do. And I knew that things were changing. And so we went and rounded up the folks in the neighborhood that we knew and said, "Please come and stay at the church." And I know we saved lives through that because they would have frozen to death. Yeah, one of the guys was a short order cook in a previous life. And so he and I went to the grocery store. We provided 3 meals a day for folks. And my session elders, I stayed the first night. I asked my session elders who would be willing to stay in the building with them at night. And I had a couple that did that. I had gone to the grocery store in the middle of it. And when I came back in and saw the elder who was there holding hands around the table, praying before the dinner, I knew that we were making a difference. And I'd made a difference, or God was making a difference in their lives as well. But ministry to homeless people, unless you have grants, doesn't really pay the bills, because it was always meaningful to see their pennies and quarters in the offering plate, but it doesn't pay the electric bill or the pay for the new air conditioner or any of that. So we did great ministry together out there, but it just wasn't enough to sustain the church.
wow. There's so much there I want to talk about. I want to go back just a little bit. This is completely off script. I realize this. I mean, I didn't send you any. These are not questions we agreed on, but you talk about the pastor who was there before, and what it sounds like to me is a major miscommunication, major misunderstanding, or differing expectations of maybe that pastor's role, right? And I just wonder how we can further help, how we can help PNCs, especially now, right? Given the pandemic, there are new understandings of what it means to do ministry in the midst of a pandemic. Recording this on July 29th of 2021, where CDC is going back and say, go back to masks, whether you're vaccinated or not. And a lot of argument about that.
No, of course, especially here in the state of Texas.
So I'm wondering now, even more now, is realizing that expectations have always been I think in some form or fashion, always been an issue of search committees, right? Make clear I always tell a mid-council search committee, make clear your expectations for whatever this role is. What are some of the ways that expectations of pastors might be changing now as a result of the pandemic? And how do we help not only the PNC, how do we help COM, committees on ministry, work with those pastor nominating committees to make clear those expectations? And how do we help to prepare the candidates for what those expectations might be, or, become more aware? I'm anticipating there might be some disparity between the two.
Oh, I think there always is, pandemic or not, because and we had a process. We haven't done it lately, but after the new pastor had been there, say 6 to 9 months, we would sit down with the pastor and the PNC in one room and the session in the other room and ask the same questions and see how well they matched. Just because, often the session doesn't have any idea that the PNC wants this.
Mhm.
And then you get that, but that's not what the congregation really wanted, because the PNC, was hoping that, the 35 to 40-year-old pastor with 4 kids and all of that could come in and grow new families, young families. Let's,
Right.
and so there's that miscommunication there. And in many ways, it feels like the expectation is that the pastor's going to, we call a new pastor and we're not going to change it all, but that pastor is going to bring all these people in. Well, to think about how long it takes to form relationships
Mhm.
and to make that a safe place, that's hard work. And so the expectation that calling a new pastor is suddenly going to be bringing people in, especially in time of pandemic. Although I am hearing from some of our congregations that they've had inquiries from people from out of town, out of state that have been part of the online community that want to become part of the church.
Sure. I mean, I've heard stories of churches welcoming new members from way outside of their community.
Right. And
Just
that
based on their
until
involvement online.
pandemic, we didn't have that.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is a different kind of ministry.
right.
That's going to take a different kind of pastor. I
It
mean,
is, and there's that what I've heard communicated to some of our pastors is, well, you haven't been working during the pandemic. It's like, yeah, I've been working harder.
right.
All the phone calls, all of this, all of that, because I can't get to the hospital to see somebody, or I can't go to the senior retirement community to go see people. I can't do this, I can't do that. So it's been a lot of phone calls and a lot of trying to get people cared for.
And not to mention the mediation between the people who are, vaccinated and those who don't believe, and
Uh-huh.
and
Which
all
has
of
really
the
come out more
management.
this year than last year, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and how to pivot to do an online presence,
Mhm.
and what equipment do we need to actually do it well? Because most of at the beginning it was, I'll use my cell phone
Mhm.
and put it on Facebook Live, but, how do you do that well? Especially if you're a church that doesn't have a whole lot of money that for nice equipment. And
Right.
then, is it the static picture of the pastor way over there preaching? And so you don't really feel invested in it, especially
Mhm.
when, somebody that has better equipment. Houston is the home of Joel Osteen and he has millions of people that watch him, but he has a big production crew. He has a big
Right,
budget.
right, 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 right. Well, I
And
will, plug out there for a plug just for all those pastors out there who are still maybe doing, live from their cell phone or what. Especially during quarantine, I experienced some of the most what felt like authentic
Mhm,
worship times with pastors who were um, perhaps sitting in their office with their cell phone propped up in front of them,
mhm,
leading worship. And for me, that felt, like I said, more authentic, maybe more personal.
mhm.
And that so I'm not sure that there's one right way to do it. There are all kinds of ways to do it, which is, some of the reason why, as a synod, we've been offering some opportunities and trainings for different, learning different ways to
Exactly. Well,
accomplish.
one of the things I learned last year, I looked at the video quality of someone who had recorded, because they were recording it like on Thursday before the Sunday morning. And I said, it looked really good. What did you do? And she said, I did it on Zoom.
Hmm.
And so that was, oh, you can do that. Yeah, you can record, just, it's a meeting by yourself, and she recorded it on Zoom, and it actually worked really well to do that.
Right.
Instead of trying to do my cell phone thing. But just to have that kind of learning. Or I know a guy that basically kind of built a video recording studio in his home, and he has a teleprompter so he can read a sermon and the whole bit.
Hmm.
And it's just the variety of different things that are out there, but we all had to learn it pretty quickly.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and and
And so my
and
concern, like I said, one of my biggest concerns is about for the future that may have, it has obviously changed the way that we do ministry. It's
Mhm.
changed so many things, and it will continue into the future. And these things weren't taught in seminary,
No,
and
no.
so, but it will, collectively as people, we can have long but short memories. And I can imagine that PNCs will begin to have some kind of expectation of, and rightfully so, some continuation of that. But how does that match with? And I love the idea of putting someone, one conversation over here asking questions of the PNC and one conversation over here asking questions of the candidate. That's fabulous idea, just to make sure that somewhere they meet in the middle. But I'm given the talking about changes in ministry and your story about St. Giles, how, that ministry to the homeless doesn't pay the bills. I, I wonder if, or what would have happened, what could have happened as a result of that, of a ministry similar to that, had it happened 3 or 4 years before. And given enough time, if you had enough money in the bank, right, if a congregation had come alive to the need in the community, that sooner, and responded in a way that was helpful to that community sooner,
Mhm.
would that have changed things? And I think in some ways the whole idea of the pandemic, the church has left the building. My biggest hope is that that will have jarred some of us into that.
Oh, exactly. And I think the hope was, well, if we hire this, granted she spoke Portuguese because she's from Brazil, but if we hire this Hispanic person, then we can start a Hispanic ministry. But
Mhm.
the church was pretty Anglo, and so you have to get through all of the, well, they don't speak my language, or they don't,
Mhm.
they don't do this or they don't do that, or they're going to be needy, or on and on. And it's helping to change the mindset of the people that are in the building to be able to welcome the people that are outside the building. Uh,
Mhm.
we had a guy from Panama who approached us about using our church, and so we were happy to do that. And he was trying to do outreach to our neighbors who were Hispanic. And after a couple of free events and stuff like that, he said, they're just gonna take. They're not willing to be part of this. They just want the hot dog or whatever. And so he kind of gave up on that. And it's always an interesting phenomenon, but you have to change the mindset and really try to tap into what is God calling us to do and be now. Who are we now?
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know that at that time that the Anglos were ready necessarily for the Hispanic ministry. And then for the pastor that they called to say, "Oh, that's the ghetto. I'm not going." That didn't help things.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all of this leads me to ask you, why would you want to be a presbytery leader?
Um, so I was first called as the stated clerk. The stated clerk who had been here 6 years or whatever was retiring, and our presbyter at the time saw gifts in me. I could take minutes during a meeting and participate in the meeting at the same time, and he saw some leadership skills in me, and so he asked me to take on this, or to consider the stated clerk position. So I was half-time pastor at St. Giles and came onto the presbytery staff basically as half-time, but the needs started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it morphed into a more full job. And then when he retired, what in 2016, we weren't quite sure what to do. They didn't call an interim. We knew that our associate general presbyter was going to leave in 2017. And we also recognized that our budget was short. And so we couldn't really bring somebody in at the salary that the presbyter was making at that time. And so I basically sort of without the title became sort of the go-to person as the
Mhm.
stated clerk, and we just didn't have a presbyter for a while. And it took a while to kind of figure out, okay, so what are we going to do? Because we felt like if we invested money at the top in a separate person, we were going to have to cut the bottom. And it wasn't fair to cut the bottom, the people that had been here for a long, long time. Let's cut at the top. And so they ended up combining the position as presbyter and stated clerk. So I had this really long title. But what they did do was to take the judicial function off of the stated clerk, and we have a separate stated clerk for judicial. And that's really helped out for those people that have stuff going on that I can then try to pastor them or help them through that, but not have to be the stated clerk with the rules hat on.
Mhm. So that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask my question differently.
Well, I think
Do you
why.
feel called to that? I mean, I know I appreciate the history that I was already aware of, and that's helpful.
Right.
But what makes you feel called to the role?
It's funny. One of my images that I gravitate towards is bridges, and bridges connect things.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to connect people. We were at a seminar, and I think I was a connector, and that's one of the things that I have strived to do or striven to do, whatever it is. I try to pull folks together, our pastors, and let's have lunch together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big one-on-one coffee person. I don't drink coffee. I'm not going to go meet you at Starbucks for coffee. I will, but I'm not going to have coffee. And so I think it's better in my mind to pull people together and to gather them so that they can share their stories together.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps to build those colleague kind of things, because ministry is a lonely task.
It is.
And so if I can pull people together and help them to build relationships, I find it's building those bridges. And then they have a group that they can commiserate with or celebrate with or whatever. When I first proposed it, even before I got the job, I had a pastor say, well, why would we want to do that? And he's become one of the biggest supporters of let's get together for lunch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that. Speaking for myself, I know the time that I get to share with my colleagues when we're in person, even when we're not, when we're by Zoom, that is the most meaningful. It's the one place I can share what's going on and have somebody that really gets it, right?
Yeah. And so for me, I think that was part of why I think I was called to this position, is to help to build those relationships. And then COVID hit.
Right.
So I had the first year I was all over the presbytery, having lunch with groups of people, and I was seeing relationships being built. And it didn't matter if you were in the big church or the little church or whatever. In some of the areas, the retired pastors are there too, and they're often totally ignored. And so it was an opportunity for them to come together with the current pastors and just have fellowship together.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit, and so I've been able to restart that just within the last couple months, and people seem really relieved to be able to get back together and see each other, and to tell their stories and to feel like somebody cares.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, New Covenant has a lot of people in validated ministries. Is that right?
We have a few doing chaplaincy in hospitals and hospice and stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do they have their own? Are you able to connect them as well?
I haven't put a lot of effort there, because typically if they're on a hospital staff, they have a group of colleagues and that sort of thing. And it's something I probably should do, but they all work such different schedules and all of that. And some of them, particularly in hospice right now, are just so overwhelmed with what's going on. To add another meeting or to add another thing, it's just too much.
Yeah.
But it's an area that I probably
I've just always been curious. I've just always been curious about validated ministries and how. Yes, I understand chaplains and having a different, like, sort of their own community. But it would seem to me that there are other validated ministries out there that maybe don't. And I've just always been curious about how a presbytery or any mid council can help them to connect. Like again, Thomas may be editing this part, but I mean, I've thought about working to establish a network for
Mhm.
basically validated ministries of all kinds.
Right.
Because I know that they run the gamut. I mean, there's
Oh,
all
exactly.
kinds of different. So yeah, just curious about that piece. So
Yeah.
generally, that's work, gathering people, connecting, especially pastors in that way has worked well um, for those in the presbytery. Or do they generally get along well?
I think we play well with each other. I really do. I, the days of standing up, and I don't know that we shouted at Presbytery meetings. Maybe that was before my time. There probably was a time that people did that.
Mhm.
We don't debate a whole lot, so we're not real strident in our yes and nos. But we also lost a lot of those folks to a different denomination. The ones that were kind of combative is probably not the right word, but it felt that way.
Well, it's sort of a different, I don't want to say belief system, but a different,
Mindset, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah. So,
probably.
and so they were typically the ones that would push back and that sort of thing, or not be in favor of something because of whatever,
Mhm.
and they didn't necessarily play well, and they were our larger churches, and so when the group of 9 elders from such and such church walked in together and sat down together and didn't want to meet other people and would sit at lunch together and there just was that difference. We could feel it. And so in many ways, though I grieve that we lost about half of our presbytery in numbers, I hope that they're happy where they are. I've heard varying things about how well those churches are doing, and this many years later, there's a part of me that says, I might reach out and say, hey, how are things going in that other denomination? And there's a part of me that says, yeah, I don't really want to know. I really don't. I mean, it was an ugly, painful time, and I was personally hurt through it. So,
Sure.
it's hard to sometimes be my nice and charming self.
I mean, it's true. Those things are difficult. So
Yeah.
I hope you've been enjoying this episode of Sunspots, a region of the Presbyterian Church USA. We are Presbyterians in Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, with dynamic and hopeful ministry happening in the name of Jesus Christ. If you have a good news story or an exceptional ministry to be highlighted, send that good news to Sunspot at synodsun.org. Now, back to the show. What are have you made mistakes over the years, Lynn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything you want to share with us that we can learn from?
Um, as I look out the window, I mean, I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
And I can't help it. I mean,
Yeah.
even just in how like even today at lunch, we had a staff lunch yesterday. I wasn't here. They saved me a plate. I didn't know they saved me a plate, and I didn't respond well when they said they'd save me a plate because it wasn't food I wanted to eat. And I felt badly about that. But I mean, even just in that sort of personal interaction, yeah, I've made mistakes,
Well, Lord, I make those personal interaction mistakes all the time.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm really grateful that they took the judicial off of me because I did not do judicial very well. And so I'm glad that we have a different state of another person that takes that part. And God bless them. Because yeah, it's when people get in trouble, that it's hard sometimes to hold them into accountability
Yeah.
in love.
Right.
Yeah.
Shaking them and saying, what the heck were you thinking isn't necessarily the best way to go, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So I hope
So,
I do more good than harm.
yeah,
And so they've allowed me to be here for well, I guess this is my 10th year. So they're keeping me around, so that's good.
that's awesome. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah,
That's,
me too.
um, I had a question in my brain and I've totally lost it. I wanted to ask you about, yeah, what are some of the best things coming out of the Presbytery of New Covenant right now, even amidst all of, you know, in and out of pandemic and all of that? What are some of the exciting things that are happening in the presbytery?
It was interesting in our last newsletter. We had asked questions along those lines, and so in our last newsletter, we featured our many congregations that have community gardens.
Mm,
And Houston is a great growing area. We get multiple growing seasons,
right.
and it was fun to hear the stories of how they got started, or how much food they're given to food pantries to have fresh tomatoes. Our church, that we're on the campus of St. Philip Presbyterian Church here at San Philip and 610, right in the Galleria area, and it's not a big community garden, but they are very productive. And I think she's told me they've given 700 pounds of vegetables to one of the food pantries. And to think that people in food deserts that don't have access to fresh food, that's huge. Our church up in Brenham, it gives their food to the food pantry up there. And to think that people are blessed with fresh vegetables
Mm,
is just amazing. And I look at how many, we're spending so much on watering grass, and we're spending so much, not here personally, but we mow all that grass and all of that.
mhm,
And how could we use our campuses to grow? And what does it mean to grow?
mhm,
And is it a way? I look at our mission statement for a long time has been growing congregations that passionately engage their communities to make disciples. Well, I mean, we called this section growing congregations because they literally are growing food. And it's all over the presbytery, and people are starting to rethink how they're using their property.
yeah,
And that's exciting to me.
it is. That's very exciting. I was with a church uh, in South Louisiana a
Hmm.
couple of weeks ago, and they're actually considering becoming an urban bee farm
Yeah.
and, planting pollinators and, um, that's that's cool. I mean,
Well,
that
exactly.
really is growing and nurturing the environment.
Well, and especially down here along the Gulf Coast where we're so petrochemical
Mhm.
dependent, our economies depend on that. Houston we have a 25-mile ship channel, and alongside are petrochemical plants because that's what we do here.
Mhm.
And so to be able to offer some kind of regeneration, we have several earth care congregations and people that are caring about the environment. And despite the fact that our biggest employers are, big petrochemical companies.
Mhm.
So we're maybe more attuned to it. That yeah, climate change is real, and our summers are hotter, and we had the because the grid failed. We had these
Right.
cold temperatures in February. One of my colleagues, it was 38 degrees inside her house
Oh,
in February. And so we don't get that in Houston.
right. Right.
Yeah, so recognizing that some things need to change, I think are big things.
Mhm.
One of one of the things that New Covenant has been able to do over the past few assemblies is to have the minority report on fossil fuels become the report that gets approved rather than the report that wants to divest from fossil fuel companies.
Mhm.
And New Covenant has taken the lead in that.
So let's talk just a little bit about that. Um, what, how can you best phrase the reason for that? I mean, your folks taking the lead in that. It's not about denying climate change.
No, not at all, not at all. And recognizing that divesting doesn't really make a difference. Somebody else is going to buy those stocks. And divesting is really difficult for the agencies that they're asking to divest because they're not going to sell at a loss, and that sort of thing. Recognizing that lots and lots of our folks earn their income through petrochemicals. I remember
churches.
Yeah, exactly. And so we can't devaluate their contributions, but we can still be mindful that climate change is real and we've got to change some things. And so that's part of what I think part of the influence that the Presbyterian Church has had on companies down here is that they're starting to do renewables and other forms of energy rather than just pulling stuff out of the ground. And if we're not at the table to have those kind of conversations, then maybe they wouldn't be doing that. I mean, we just learned that Exxon knew this years ago and has been covering it up. But the divestment question is always difficult. And I was having lunch with Rick Young from the Texas Presbyterian Foundation a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about, sometimes you have to get way, way, way down in that company's portfolio or to see what other companies they own to find, oh yeah, they're petrochemical too, but you didn't know it. And so they're not on the list to divest from. But the divestment question for me is not if people are making money that way, I'm okay with that. But I want personal responsibility. And so in my mind, our churches, our members need to be taking personal actions that are going to make a difference.
And well, in at least for me anyway, personal actions from individuals and congregations, but also advocacy from them. I think the answers are in advocacy, not in just taking our money and walking away.
Exactly.
That doesn't do anything except, like you said, add to the pockets of other people. So yeah, I appreciate that. I think that could be helpful for some people to know and understand a little bit more deeply. So thanks for explaining that.
Well, sure. And and if somebody's retired from one of those big companies and that's where their pension money's coming from, to say to them, the church doesn't support your company, is sort of a slap in the face. And so I understand where the group is coming from that wants us to divest, and they keep bringing it back and bringing it back. But the agencies keep saying we can't do that. I understand that the denomination doesn't support certain kinds of companies like gambling or gun makers or tobacco and all of that kind of stuff. But it's really difficult to talk about petrochemical. I mean, how does a hospital work without products from petrochemicals?
Right.
Plastic,
right. Well, even what we're doing right now is reliant on petrochemicals. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How'd my cell phone get to the country? It was probably made in a foreign country and it came over on a ship and got onto a train that then got onto a truck that then got into the store that I drove to get there.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Lynn, it's been great to visit with you. A couple of, random quick personal questions.
Sure.
You up? Your favorite food?
I love Mexican food. So I there's a place I go that they make really great nachos, and I'd love to have their nachos. Is it my favorite food? Sometimes the favorite food is what's sitting in my plate in front of me that particular meal.
I can totally relate with that.
Yeah.
Favorite song, or maybe genre. Let's put that genre of music. Let's start there.
I'm pretty open, and so I don't know that I have a particular favorite song. I like to listen to jazz. I like to listen to rock. I like to listen to gospel. I like to listen to rhythm and blues, soul music. I mean, I kind of cross the gamut. And certainly some church music in there too, to say music. But I like music.
I'll steal a question from Charlie Smith from Indian Nations Presbytery. Your dashboard pounding tune.
I've gotten to where I listen to NPR in the car.
Oh,
And so I, I don't watch a lot of news at home. And so in my 15 or 20 minutes, I'm catching up on NPR. And so I don't know if I have a dashboard pounding tune. I have songs that I sing along with. And maybe that's different, but they can be old songs or new songs. But I've gotten to where I'm not listening to music in the car anymore. Or if I do, it's just like a 10-minute, 15-minute drive. So I don't know if I have a dashboard pounding tune.
Yeah, I think more often than not, I mean, I watch a lot of news at home, but more often than not, if I'm in the car, I'm listening to something like Forensic Files.
Yeah. So you do podcasts, I do NPR.
Yeah.
And it's funny because during the evening when we're together, my husband controls the remote control, and we watch a lot of sports because he loves the Astros and he loves the Rockets. And guess who's on almost every night?
Yeah. Well, that explains how you're such a fan. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so that becomes difficult in some ways. So I get to watch what I want to watch after he goes to bed.
So what are you reading right now?
Facebook and Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, I just bought the new Clint Smith book, but I haven't read it yet. And it would have to look up what it's about. I'm not a big reader. I tend to listen more or watch. So like I'll watch 60 Minutes or Frontline or things like that, and that's kind of where I get my information. I haven't been a big reader since seminary, probably.
I was just going to say I don't think I've ever met a pastor who's used those words. I'm not a big reader. I can relate to that. So
yeah, I mean, I used to own a lot of books, and when we moved, I gave a whole bunch of them away, and I'm not buying a lot of books right now. So that's the last book I bought about 6 weeks ago. It's sitting on my dining room table.
Yeah. And last question. I think I already know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Your favorite beverage, adult or otherwise?
Oh, my favorite beverage. I drink water during the day, and it's water, even though it kind of looks dark.
Red glass, come on.
Yeah, exactly. We drink a lot of wine, and tequila is my other go-to.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so I drink water
or a margarita. Which one?
But I don't drink those margaritas as big as your head.
No, that would be your predecessor, right?
Yeah.
Lynn, thank you so much for visiting with me today.
No, you're welcome. It's been
learned
fun.
A lot more about you than what I've known you for 10 years.
I know
about you. That's great. Thanks.
Indeed. Well, it's been fun.
In the Synod of the Son, we believe when we work together across boundaries, we make visible the good news and find wholeness as the body of Christ. In our common calling, we impact lives together. So let's remember to connect with, equip, and empower one another in the name of Jesus Christ, today and every day.